Welcome to Real Talk Food Safety with Jill and Tia and our special guest, Yvonne Masters.
Yes, we're super excited to have you all here with us today. And we're always curious who is out there? Who's watching us right now? And we don't know until we go back and look on LinkedIn, but we don't know for sure unless you put it in the comments. So please comment, say hello, add an emoji, let us know where you are watching from.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, and if you've been on LinkedIn this morning, you may see I'm so happy. Did you see my picture where we have less snow finally?
No, I didn't.
Yes.
That's
Even
awesome.
overnight, like it was amazing how much snow melted in our backyard. And so I actually took a picture and I'm like, almost no snow. Almost no snow.
Ooh, well, it is getting in the 80s today in Baltimore. I know I'm kind of rubbing it in for you too.
No, that's okay. I don't want 80s.
Okay.
I want more than 30. That's it.
The warmer temperatures are on the way, hopefully, right? And we are stepping into springtime, summertime, and I'm excited about that.
Absolutely. And Yvonne, is it nice by you in Chicago?
Yeah, it's around 60 degrees. Should get to the
Mm,
maybe 80 later on today.
Ooh,
nice.
it's gonna be perfect. Ooh,
Nice.
well, we can't wait to talk more about, well, food safety and inclusive leadership.
hmm Which is
Oh,
super important, right? As we talk about food safety culture. And hello to Tim from 35,000 feet
woohoo!
in
Wow.
the air.
Wow,
This might be a new place of someone
that
watching
might be.
Real Talk.
That just might be. Yeah.
I love that. Thanks for joining us, Tim.
Yes. Yes. Well, we all know food safety. It can be hard. I mean, it can be fun and easy too. But well, actually, I don't know if I've ever seen it be easy. But it definitely can be hard. And, whether it's crazy hours or sometimes it feels like we're pushing the rope, whatever those things are. But it's so much easier when we bring people along with us and include them.
hmm hmm
I think Tia, like you said, and we talked yesterday at our prep meeting, like that's food safety culture. That's
It is.
including everyone.
It is. And you really don't have a culture at all, right? Like you don't have that word culture if you aren't bringing people along. And if you're the people that you're bringing along aren't inclusive, right? Aren't diverse, don't have a different way of thinking, and don't have different backgrounds, and don't have, if everyone thought the same, if everyone did exactly the same thing, right? You really don't have a culture. You probably just have, I don't know, robots of everyone.
You don't need a whole team. You just need one person then.
Right. I was trying to think of a Star Wars word clones. Like really that's what you have is clones. But even if you are watching Star Wars, right, then you know that even clones, they started to develop their own personalities and identities, right, which only makes them stronger. Because that's what we want to do, right? We want to be ourselves. We want to bring our whole self to work. And if we're not embracing that, then we really miss out on the culture piece.
We do. We do. And I just have to pause because I mean, periodically we'll talk about like a Star Wars or something funny. Yvonne, are you a Star Wars watcher?
I watch Star Wars, but not like a big, big fan. So I may not know all the catchphrases and things like
No.
that and characters.
I don't either, but I have a couple kids that are very much into Star Wars. So Tia, I was like, did you bring that up? Because it's Wednesday release day
It
for
is.
like Mandalorian. So
Right, it is. My husband is super into it. It's so funny. Over the weekend, he was asking, when can we introduce our small child? Just turned one, Tiana. When can we introduce Tiana to Star Wars? And I'm like, I have no idea. Let's make a social media poll about it to find out when can you introduce your child to Star Wars. So it's so funny. We just had that conversation. But honestly, he just updates me on everything. I only know things that has happened in the recent years.
anyways, kind of our side rabbit hole for today.
Right, all right, of course. Welcome to Real Talk. Welcome to Real Talk.
This is where we
But
go sometimes.
it does all tie into culture, right? And even thinking about like people's personalities and what their interests are, right? Like that makes this culture of people. And if we don't have inclusive leaders, right? Like food safety culture, is really not going to exist.
Mhm. Yeah. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So, welcome, Tim. Good to see you. Laurel, Michael, and Simon.
Hello.
Thank you. We'd love to know, like, what do you see as something that's been important, maybe wherever you are, that has helped with inclusive leadership? Because everyone always has a different tip. So we'd love if you would put that in the chat and let us know.
Yeah, we'll love hearing about that.
We should. Well, and I think we should talk about, like, if it is your first time, right? We always do. We want to make sure people know that we're here every Wednesday doing Real Talk.
Right.
But it's actually part of our commitment to helping improve our ability to lead in food safety and to help with the well-being of our team members. Because one, we are better together, but two, when we went through all of our technical training, that didn't often include leadership development that is effective for us as technical leaders. And so that's really what Catalyst does. We help technical experts really step into being technical leaders through a well-planned development program. So it follows as you mature through your career as well.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us today with Yvonne.
Yes, we're excited that you are here, including Simone as well as Claire. Welcome.
Yes. Awesome. Well, I think we should dive in, don't you, Tia?
Yes, I do. Which we're super excited about our guest with us today, Dr. Yvonne Masters. We're excited to have you here today because you have lived in this space, right? You've lived in the space of food safety, really working on food safety culture, and you are an inclusive leader in this space as well. So we're going to love the conversation that we're going to have today. And we're super excited that you all are listening to us out there. So we'll start by, Yvonne, just starting with you, telling us about yourself, what led you to food and what you do in your current role.
Sure. So I think I started really early in food. So a little bit about my background, my family, actually. So my grandfather, he was a Vietnam refugee that came to this country. And both my parents are immigrants in this country. And they started a restaurant business in Illinois, a Chinese restaurant, but again, from Vietnam. And so my ethnicity is Chinese. I was born in Chicago in the United States, and they had this restaurant business. And I remember growing up in the restaurant, and even my mom was kind of bartending during happy hour. I would be back from school at the restaurant and then sitting behind the bar and then watching my mom kind of bartend. So early introduction into food through the family restaurant. And just kind of in my education, I kind of went through my bachelor's degree. I chose microbiology because it had the least amount of math courses. I'm not very good at math. There's that Asian stereotype that, Asians are good at math. This Asian is not good at math. So I picked microbiology because I like science, but it had the least amount of math courses.
That's awesome.
And and then I
I love that you started with already shedding some stereotypes.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Just putting that out there. Math, not me. Don't go to me for that.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
And took a food science course on food safety, food microbiology. Ended up doing my master's degree in food science at the University of Illinois. So did some research on food safety there, worked on Shigella, that pathogen. And then eventually went to do my PhD in food science and Dr. Martin Weidman's lab. And that was the food safety lab at Cornell University, and worked on Listeria monocytogenes.
Wow.
So my education there, again, it was not an easy task. I mean, I went on student loans, fellowships, assistantships. I had 2 jobs, part-time jobs as an undergrad, working in the microbiology laboratory and also the food safety laboratory, washing dishes or glassware, autoclaving biohazard. So just working my way through that. And then I did have some internships as well. General Mills at the Yoplait plant in California. Lisa Robinson was my manager there. You probably know Lisa, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then did a couple of internships at Kraft Foods. Had some wonderful managers there. Theodora Morrill,
Yes.
she was my manager. And then Richard Brulette, he was my manager as well in those internships. And early career as a microbiologist, working my way up to senior microbiologist in food safety at Kraft Foods, and also a quality leader for dairy, cheese, and suppliers and co-mans. So
Oh,
had experiences there. And then mid-career food safety manager at John B. Sanfilippo, processor of nuts. Again, it was at that level for about 5 years. And, I had things going on in my personal life too, as well. Had my daughter, took maternity leave. So, and then currently I'm in my role as a director of food safety and quality policy. And it's interesting getting to that level as a director because I was at a manager level for quite some time. And I don't know if you want to hear how that kind of happened, but it happened all
absolutely.
during the pandemic. Okay. So I was a manager, and then the COVID pandemic hit. And we had a crisis management team that kind of dealt with this new virus that was going around. And I was brought onto the team because of my microbiology background, somebody that may know something about a virus. Okay. Again, I deal with foodborne pathogens, but okay, I could work with this one, out of my comfort zone, but it's out of everybody's comfort zone, right? At this point, right?
Right.
So, was on the crisis team, had to meet with management, including senior leaders, VPs, senior directors, C-suite every day, including on weekends, because of this pandemic crisis.
Wow.
And I did a lot of work with looking at all the regulatory requirements, federal, state, CDC, OSHA, looking through that and summarizing all that data about COVID and requirements to the team so they can make appropriate decisions. Okay. And some of these decisions were made before some of the requirements actually came out or guidance came out from CDC, FDA, and things like that. So again, it was very challenging work out of my comfort zone. I had to write some HR policies. I had to help write some employee safety policies, had to implement, medical screening, everyone wearing a mask and getting screened, and then social distancing. I was a social distancing ambassador, checking off, making sure everybody was at least 6 feet away, wearing their mask, washing their hands and things. And it's actually interesting because at the beginning of the pandemic, we did not have face coverings, could not buy them. We had some N95 masks for the medical screeners, but I just kind of had my scarf. So I call it my N95 scarf with my face shield. So if you want to see a picture of me, it's on my Instagram. It's there.
That's awesome.
Okay? Yeah. So
That's awesome.
with that work, getting out of my comfort zone, really affecting the organization in a positive way, keeping employees safe, kind of led me to this director position. And, working with people in our C-suite, they recognize that I'm able to kind of lead and do this type of work. And again, that was just the COVID, work. I had my regular job in food safety and as well. So looking at food safety culture, food defense. I did thermal validations, food safety training, and working also on R&D innovation projects. And then also I do my plant visits. I know Tia called me before, and I was actually in the plant. So I do a lot of plant visits as well. Not as much as I did when I was like a supplier quality, but a few visits here and there throughout the year.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love the story too of you. Thank you for sharing your path to being a director, because it just shows that you, even though it wasn't in your role of responsibility, and all of us was sort of in the world, right, was dealing with this global pandemic, and we were all kind of in this space of, we're not really sure, right? And we saw a lot of food companies lean on their food safety people. for COVID, even though we were like, this might be a little bit more human safety. I'm not sure. We don't really know what's going on. But the fact that you stepped into this leadership role, right, and had these leadership skills that you were able to use, and the organization was able to benefit from and then reward, it's awesome. Like that's like an awesome positive experience where, you know, if you maybe hadn't focused on your leadership prior to this, or said, you know what, like I'm not sure if I can step into that role, or maybe I'm not the right person for it, and you decide to take a step back versus a step forward, then maybe even your career would have looked a little bit different.
Yeah. And again, you know, unfortunately it was the pandemic, but that's kind of how I got into my role. And it's, you know, a very interesting situation, but I feel very fortunate that my manager, who is the VP of food safety and quality at our company, was able to bring me on board like that. So
yeah, that's awesome.
Well, I think, like you said, even in COVID, while that may be in our minds, we may think, wow, that was maybe an extreme example of how to demonstrate food safety can be a partner and an integrated business partner, right? Because that's what we do as we are in our careers and helping with food safety, is how do we demonstrate to the business that we're here to enable the business, and that we really are here to help support the other functions and collaborate. And so I love that story. Even though it's extreme, it's still demonstrating that that's an area where we do, like Tia, like you said, step in versus stepping back. And how do we do that? And I think your story really helps shine a light on how we can do that effectively.
Yeah. I love that. I love that.
Yes, that is good. Well, you know, and we started with, and you know, you talk about COVID, which certainly we all know wasn't the easiest of years to go through. But we're curious because we've talked about, right, even with COVID, food safety is still a heavy load. And I guess I'm curious, you know, as you've traversed your career so far, like what have you seen as one of the biggest challenges in food safety?
I think one of the biggest challenges, I guess, from a technical perspective is how reliant some companies are on pathogen testing. Like, do you do it? Do you not do it? We're always trying to find quicker methods because you kind of have to hold the product, and making sure that the method is sensitive enough, but, you know, rapid and validated for your product, and also compositing, you know, so it has to also be, you have to be able to take numerous samples into one sample for cost savings. Some people may rely on it too much, so it's more of a lagging indicator because, like, once it's already positive, it's kind of too late. But I think we should also look at more leading indicators, like your microbial validation, your food safety checks that you're doing for preventive controls, or your HACCP checks for your critical control points. So important to have all that as part of your food safety system and not just reliant on testing.
Oh, that's a great point. Because I think, like, even as we talk about those things, and even as we, right, help organizations build their food safety programs, really thinking about those prerequisites, right? Like that foundation, and being in food safety. So I might just even be talking to the choir, right? Like we live it, right, every day, but to refocus and say, okay, what is really that foundation? What are we doing to prevent? Like, that's the type of space that we want to live in.
Well, and I love that it comes from you, Yvonne, just being in micro. And I presume since you did a PhD in micro, that you kind of love micro, right? Where you're kind of like, micro is powerful, but it's not the thing to rely on. It almost reminds me a little bit of like cost of quality, because if we're waiting for micro, the end game, like too late, we've already spent more here and it's going to cost us more than if we focus over here on this side and think about the ways that we are, right, like we all talk about, like what are we investing up front,
right,
so that we're already on the path of success versus waiting over here where it's too late.
I almost like to think about you know, my micro as like confirming what I already know. Right, like there really should be no surprises when you send off your micro to be tested, right? Like, and to get the results back. And if you get something back and it's positive, it's more like, oh no, what's happening in our environment that our prerequisites, right, didn't catch. But it really should not be a surprise. And it should just confirm all the things that you already know.
Yeah, but that's really insightful advice about where to spend time and money and energy.
Yeah.
So I know often when we're in food safety, we'll focus on kind of like this, like right, the technical sides of what we see, because that's really the area people expect us to be. But even with the story that you shared about COVID and stepping into leadership in a different way, what have you seen as, challenges when it comes to technical leadership?
Yeah, so for leadership, I think as a scientist, as a microbiologist, working in the food industry or for a food company, it's really developing that business acumen. So kind of understanding what the needs of the business are, but also keeping our products safe. We want our consumers to like our products, not to get sick off of it or, have something worse happen. So I think developing kind of a business acumen, dealing with certain functions and people like marketing or sales and C-suite, but also making sure, food safety is priority number one. And I think going from an individual contributor as like a scientist to a people manager and more of a decision maker or major influencer of decision making is so important to have kind of those business skills and also having those soft skills as well.
Yes. I mean, you're like speaking our language, right? You are like throwing out all the buzzwords for because that's exact, that we agree with that because exactly like where you've been, we've been there too, right? With technical backgrounds, we really don't get those leadership skills, right? And that business acumen, like that is like learned over time or someone needs to help you develop those, or even you need to know, like someone needs to tell you like, hey, like this is really a thing. It's a different way of influencing, right? Like once you step into a role where you're managing others or you're a strategic player in the organizations. And we just don't get that as technical experts.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, I think I grew up in an era where they were like, science will set us free, data will set us free. I learned quickly that's not always true in terms of how do we present that information so that it is relatable for others.
Yeah.
But I think it also comes to, are we willing, I should say, are we willing, but how can we step into or step out of our comfort zones, to use, Yvonne, your words, to be in a space where we might be a little uncomfortable, but it's helping us include more people in the conversation and understand.
Yeah. It's almost like a requirement, like when you talk about like talking with marketing and sales and other people outside of, our core technical roles, right? Like we talk about it around like just talking, to non-technical staff or talking to non-technical functions and how to communicate with them and influence them and be a business partner to them. It's this whole sense of I need to step outside of myself, right? And learn how to communicate differently, learn how to influence differently, learn what someone else might enjoy, right? Learning who, we love to say the whole person, right? Really understanding the whole person that you're working with, yourself as well as others, right? And then how you both, or you as a team, right, both play together is key really to that influence, to building relationships, to creating safe spaces, to all the things that we talk about regularly at Catalyst, because it's needed as you think about moving into leadership or being a more influential leader.
Yeah.
I love that.
And along those lines, right, there are parts that we stereotype, right? Like how marketing will respond or what information they'll need or how these people will react or like what these people are good at. And part of what we wanted to talk about today was how to be more inclusive in our leadership. And so Yvonne, right? And
Yeah.
if like I said, can we talk about one of the elephants in the room? Like, you're a woman of Asian heritage in corporate America in food.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like you said earlier, people are like, well, you must be good at math.
No,
Like,
not
what?
at all.
But what are some of the things that we kind of as a food safety community can do? I mean, I guess let me step back. I'm stacking questions. Like, what's it like being in food safety, a food safety professional in this space? And then, of course, I want to dive into like, what are some things that as a food safety community we can start doing different or noticing so that we can be more inclusive and less stereotyping?
Yeah. So I'll tell you a story. I was a student and I was trying to find my first internship, my first job.
Mhm.
And at that time, it was, you know, right after 9/11. Okay.
Mhm.
So I was I was a little bit naive. Okay, I was young and I was just like, "Oh, I'm gonna find this internship." I'm working in one of the labs. I have 2 lab jobs washing, dishes. I
Right.
have references and things like that. And I go up to this job fair with my resume and go up to, some of the food companies, recruiters and things like that, because I knew I wanted to do food safety.
Yeah.
And somebody in my lab said, "Oh, yeah, we have this former person that was in the lab. They work for this company. I think you would be good there." So I go and talk to the recruiter of this food company. She takes my resume and then she says, "I'm sorry, we don't take students with visas," and then just hands my resume back. And I was like baffled. I'm like, well, what is this? I was naive too, so I had no idea what she was talking about. I was born in the US, so I said, "Visa, what is that?" And I found out later she thought I was a foreign student.
Mm.
That she thought I was in a student visa, that I couldn't work for the company. My realization is, oh my God, she just kind of stereotyped me and put me in that box just looking at me.
Mm.
So I think we need to be a little bit more careful.
Mm.
Just when you first meet somebody, don't put people into a box or a
Mm.
category or
Yeah.
stereotype them. Really get to know them, ask the right questions, think before you kind of ask or those questions or, say what you're thinking. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's such a powerful story because, first of all, she wasn't correct, right? And knowing you and how brilliant you are, right? Like not welcoming you into that company, right? Like they've already missed out on some things just because she thought you were someone that you're not, right? She put a label on you that didn't belong there, right? Nor was she able to, even if that label did exist, what more can you explore there, right?
Mhm.
And so being able to completely just shutting people off, right? Like stops great people from being in your circle, right? And I'm kind of curious too on like what kind of impression did that leave on you? Like once you found out like what that meant,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
What kind of impression did that leave on you just with that organization, not even that person?
Yeah, I mean, they're a supplier now for a company, so, I still think back to that day, but I mean, I don't hold it against them, it's just that one person. But again, things like this do happen to me as an Asian woman. It happens more often than it should.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's some data out there. Again, some data from the Ascend, which is a Pan Asian leader group. And they did a study looking at some of the data and from some work environments. And
Yeah.
Asian women are the least promoted group out of all the groups from comparing race and gender. And there's really a double glass ceiling on
Mm.
Asian women.
Mm.
And they were comparing percent of executives versus the percent of professionals. They had a executive parity index
Yeah.
looking at how many executives or people director or above versus individual contributors or managers. And it was interesting because they did look at the data that included manufacturing in that sector. And there is a double glass ceiling
Wow.
depending on your race and gender.
Mm.
So there is some bias out there, some unconscious bias,
Yeah.
especially in the corporate world. So
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so powerful because, we hear statistics and then we go, okay, so what does that mean for us? Like, what can we do for that?
yeah.
Where do we start so that we can be more
Yeah.
awareness?
Yeah. So I'm actually the co-lead for our Asian American Pacific Islander employee resource group in my company. And we kind of brought this information, to our company saying, hey, this is out there. This is kind of a reality right now for us.
Yeah.
And bringing that to our company. And we had like a webinar, like a company-wide webinar on API, our group. And we presented that information saying, hey, it's out there. You have to be conscious of this. And this is what we're doing at our company to kind of help with that, having leadership resources, having this group together so we could support one another. So I think it's just so important just to know that it's out there and move forward on providing resources to help with that.
Yeah. I'm curious on how do you feel these numbers and even just the experiences that you see and the experiences that you hear, how does that impact food safety culture?
Yeah, so I try to be more inclusive leader, and there's like a couple of things. I could tell you a couple of stories. So one of them is I worked on this project to try to get some of our quality team, including technicians, supervisors, and our manager, thinking of different ideas about food safety culture. What can we bring to the employees? I was running out of ideas, so I needed more perspectives. And we came up with a few, like they want to do something on food safety in football. And then we were thinking maybe include the Olympics. So the Olympics, there's a number of different countries involved. There's a number of different sports involved. And one of our quality technicians, thought that was a great idea because we have a number of different ethnicities and backgrounds and cultures in our plant employees. And our HR data supports that. I mean, most of our employees are Hispanic. We have people who prefer different languages and things when they're training and things like that. So they came up with this Olympics type food safety culture information where they featured different countries and they highlighted like a different food from that country, and depending on like who won that week and whatever sport it was. And they did something where like, okay, this food has this allergen in it. Did you know that? And did you know that we have this allergen in our plant? So kind of tying that all together, relating to the employee and being very inclusive in that way. And those technicians, actually, both of them got promoted.
Wow.
So they were, very good in contributing their ideas, putting all this together themselves, and it really shined and really got them promoted as well.
I love that story because there's a few, like you hit on like so many things that you being the leader was inclusive in the sense that you asked for other people's ideas. Your team, right? Your team, your plants and the people that work on the floor. You understand that, like you said, your HR data supports the different cultures that exist. And so for you to even recognize that and go out and seek that information and then help your team figure out a way on how do we include everyone is like amazing, right? And then like for you to be able to allow your team to then carry that and bring their whole self to work. And, they obviously love sports, right? And watch the Olympics. And for you to be able to say, yeah, if that's what you love to do and that's a part of who you are, bring that to work. because that can make us stronger and make us even better as an organization, even from a food safety culture standpoint. So I love that. That's just a few things that you kind of called out that show just like how inclusive leadership is so important to not just the individual, right, with their promotion, but even as a culture, why that it's important to an organization.
Yeah. Yvonne, I'm wondering, as you told that story, which of course I love, how it sounds like part of that is just also being aware, but also being very intentional.
Yeah.
How does that play into how we can be more inclusive leaderships? Be more inclusive leaders, I should say.
Yeah, so you really have to be intentional. For example, with our food safety culture program, when we first kind of started, I was just like, well, how am I going to get all these people to do any of this stuff? Because I have to get, operations and like other folks to like really buy into it. So I ended up putting it as kind of a continuous improvement charter that was approved by senior leaders. And we actually had the chief operating officer be the executive sponsor for the project.
Oh, wow.
And that really got, you know, uh, operations managers or production managers really involved because it was the COO kind of in charge of it or a sponsor of it. And how I be really intentional is I include, HR in some of the meetings, of course, quality and food safety, but also operations as well, and at different levels, from the CEO all the way down to a supervisor specialist level, in some of these meetings that we have. And it takes a lot of prep to do these meetings. I mean, the secret sauce to doing some of these larger scale meetings and really bringing everybody together and being inclusive is you have to have really an agenda ahead of time and let everybody know, what's on that agenda so they're really prepared.
Mm.
And the other thing is if you want certain people to talk about certain topics and they're really not speaking up, maybe they're, at more of an individual contributive level where they don't want to speak up. You talk to that person ahead of time saying, yeah, I think you did a great job on this part of the project. Can you just talk a little bit about it during the meeting where the COO is going to be there and some of our VPs? And they're more analytical folks,
Yeah.
so they need to prepare ahead of time. They need to kind of process it.
Yeah.
And they also need more details like, well,
Mm.
how long should I speak for? What point should I speak about? And I tell them all this ahead of time. And they're like, okay, I think I could do this. Just give me a day to, think about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then other times, like sometimes the quality manager is on vacation and I have to have one of the production managers speak about food safety culture. So again, I prep them ahead of time. Hey, quality manager's not here. Can you talk about this? Here's what he gave me on the data. Just read through it. I think you'll do great on it. So
Yeah.
again, having all these people talk about it during these larger scale meetings, bringing them all together, you have to do some prep ahead of time. It's like the meeting before the meeting, but then at the end, the COO or VP is like, wow, I never hear these people speak. This is great. And you're just like, yeah, this is great. But it takes a lot of prep to do it.
It does. Intentional prep, right? Like
Mhm.
you intentionally go out and prep and make sure you spend that time, right? Doing that work. And that's so important.
Yeah.
Well, and I love how that demonstrates being people focused. I think as technical leaders, we can sometimes get caught in being, I'm going to say doers, right? Like we do technical things. We create policies, we do data, we do reports, which is all an important aspect. But when we have especially direct reports and when we're also looking to be more effective influencers, being people focused, I love that it's prep work, but really you're setting people up for success.
Yeah.
How amazing. And from what you've talked about, like how powerful that is for them, but also for others in your organization to be able to see that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
That is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I want to circle back to the AAPI group that you have at your organization. And many organizations have ERG groups. And I'm curious on what your perspective is around um, how important they are and how they help shape culture at an organization.
Oh gosh, they are so important. I mean, it really brings people together.
Mm.
We had a couple of events, like a Diwali event. We have this huge like food event in our company, so people, in the building can try like different types of food that they may never had before.
Yeah.
And we had some employees that are, South Asian, and they dressed up in traditional dress, and you could actually see how beautiful everything was when, what they were wearing with the saris and everything. So just bringing that together, just getting together and, learning new things and kind of bringing some of that culture out there to others. So it's just wonderful. And we also did a Lunar New Year event in our Texas plant as well, doing something very similar. So,
That's
yes.
awesome. I mean, that's just helps you bring your whole person to work, right? And have that sense of belonging because you're able to fully be yourself and, and celebrate your customs and traditions. Or even just share a piece of your culture,
Yeah.
right? Like whether it's cooking some food or whatever, it's your dress or whatever it happens to be, like sharing a piece of yourself at work. Like, I mean, that I know that it has been impactful to even me, right?
Yeah. And the other part to it is that's kind of the celebration part, but you need to talk about the harder things too.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
So
Mm.
having those leadership development discussions is important. We brought in a speaker that was AAPI, again, a Filipino woman, a lawyer, and she spoke about, her background, her perspective, and it kind of really showed, that we're not alone. Like,
Yeah.
uh, that we had similar experiences, but she was so successful in her career, and she kind of talked a little bit about that, and it was very inspirational. And we had some other resources too, where we signed people up with the McKinsey Executive Leadership Program.
Oh,
So that was very helpful as well to some of our people. So a lot of different things that you kind of can't just do the celebration part.
yeah.
You kind
Hmm.
of have to work on some of the harder topics as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, kind of along those lines, because, I've been in facilities where, had that been proposed, and in places where it probably was proposed, where people would be like, we run a business, folks, right? We don't have time to like go explore cultures and have these events and these celebrations. Like, we all come here to work.
Yeah.
So, how do we better approach people so that, or how can we approach people like that maybe a little bit differently or to be more effective? Because there's always going to be somebody in the crowd who's going to be like, yeah, we don't need to be, we are already good people, right? Like, we include everybody and they maybe don't see that. How do we approach that?
I don't know. I have not experienced that in my company. They're so supportive of our ERGs, even our CEO.
That's awesome.
He's in one of the ERGs. So I don't know. It's difficult to say. I have not experienced that.
Well, I think that's great that you haven't because
Yeah.
that means that you're in a space where you feel like you belong, right? And that values you and that values your counterparts and that has this way of inclusivity, right? And making sure that everyone has a voice. And if you want to share something, right, you're able to share it,
Yeah.
you know?
And I think that comes maybe from valuing the whole person.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's like, I'm always like, do you love your people? Because if you love them, it's like all of it, right? as imperfect as we are as humans, but inviting people into that conversation. And Tia, it reminds me of, even the 3 Ps that we talk about in Catalyst. Like,
Yeah.
how do we build relationships so that it's not just on a professional level and about priorities at work, but really the personal side too, so that people, right, we see people.
Yeah.
Belonging is all about seeing people and hearing people and including people. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yvonne, to kind of piggyback off of Jill's last question, I think a piece of like when you talk about your experience, even at your current organization, like they have created this safe space so that people can say, hey, I want to do something to celebrate my culture, or the New Year's coming up for my culture, I want to celebrate that. How do you think your organization created that safe space or continue to really foster and feed that safe space for your organization, for the people there?
I think it's really the support of the executives.
Mm.
Um, they said that anybody can join our ERGs, that they're welcome to it, even advocates as well.
Yeah.
So it's so important. And each of our ERGs has an executive sponsor. So there's even more support there.
Oh, I love that. I love the executive sponsor, piece of it. And I've been a part of ERGs and large organizations, small organizations. I've helped created some, and so having that executive sponsor, especially an executive sponsor that might not even identify with the ERG, in the sense of obviously I'm in Black professionals, right? The executive sponsor doesn't have to be a Black professional at the organization. So being able to show that this is how we're being inclusive and this is how we're listening to different voices and different people, like is so important, right? But still allowing those groups to have safe spaces to be themselves and have difficult conversations that they might see in their circles and feel safe, right? Like I always bring it back to safe spaces, feeling safe to voice those things. Okay.
I do love that. And I think about how we can be better allies, right? So for example, here I'm the white woman, and while we all share perhaps gender the same as women, but to recognize, for me, one of the things that I've been learning and hopefully putting better into practice is that, right, all of our experiences are really different, and all because I'm a woman and you're a woman, that we still have very different experiences. And in a space where so many things have been built to support different, I'm going to say, power structures, status management.
Yeah.
And even in my space, how do I become more aware, and how do I pause? I think, Yvonne, like you said, to notice what I'm saying, what I'm asking.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if I hear something, like, to speak up, to say something, and how to approach that. And I'm not sure if that's anything that you would have any advice, because, of course, we're all still learning and understanding what are better ways that we can help be allies.
Yeah. So I'll tell you a story. So we were working with this vendor, and they wanted our business and things like that. So we had a group kind of evaluate what they were kind of selling, and um, it was interesting because the vendor kept going to this one person in our group and thinking they were kind of the decision maker or leader. Again, a older white male, okay, but that person was not a decision maker. They're like two levels, lower than a director. So it was interesting in that way that they kept, going towards this person as kind of the leader, thinking that they are the leader or the decision maker. So, in that type of situation, if that does happen, maybe that person should have kind of said something saying, hey, not really the decision maker, you should really, talk to this person. But unfortunately, in that situation, it never really happened. But, if you do see something like that happen and you do kind of recognize it, saying something when the other person, really can't say anything, it'd be really awkward, would be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And, even to add to what you're saying, Yvonne, is like prepping for those times, right? Sometimes it's interesting when you find yourself in a situation and you're like, man, I could have said something at that time, or I could have said something differently. It's just that you didn't know or you hadn't prepared for it. But something where it's like educating yourself and being prepared for those type of situations to say, okay, if I am a white male in a room and I see that people are starting to address questions to me, like I'm ready for my response. You know, whether I'm a witty person, I have a witty response, or I'm a serious person, I have a serious response. Like whatever it is your person. Like you are ready to give those responses, because if you really look at it from the other side, right? And Yvonne, like I love the story that you called out, like even looking for an internship and being naive and not knowing that was even an option, right? As you start to look for other jobs, you're a lot more prepared on if someone was to say, oh, well, you know, we don't do sponsorships, right? Now you have something in your mind that you are probably going to be able to say and address. I don't know if you'll go work for that company if it happens, right? But you are more prepared to handle that situation because you now know it exists and you've had time to process it and think about what you're going to say and do in that situation.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And it's interesting with this vendor because I was talking to another food safety director who was also a woman of color, and apparently that vendor did the same thing to her. So, and I don't think people realize that we talk to one another in these situations. So, it's interesting that that the vendor kind of didn't do their homework and kind of had that type of attitude, unfortunately. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is very interesting.
But again, we do talk. I even have a holiday celebration, you know, during the holidays, like around Christmas, Hanukkah time, where I do have some food safety folks come to my house, about like 15 or 20 of them. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We do have a potluck and everything, probably the safest potluck that you could have during the holidays. But we do talk with one another.
I love that.
Me
Yes.
too. You know, I think that's such a good point on like people talk. And I think that as you think about building your food safety culture, like people that's out here listening, right, and thinking about how to strengthen your food safety culture and being intentional about being inclusive, people talk. And if you don't have a culture of belonging and inclusivity and all of those things, like people are talking about it, you know, whether or not you're like, oh, we don't get any questions about it, or no one ever says anything to us about it, and we just continue as business normal. People are talking. People are talking, and that is really preventing your culture, including food safety culture, from growing and strengthening and being exactly what you want and need it to be. So I think that's a really great point.
Yeah. You know, and I think even from, you know, for being an ally, like being intentional and being articulating that, like my intention is to be inclusive. And so, you know, welcoming feedback, and I think actively asking for feedback. Like, how could I be more inclusive? How could I have done something different? How could I have been more inclusive in that meeting? How could I have included more voices?
Mm-hmm.
I think is important as well, because, or can be important, because so often we're like, why? I'm a good person. I'm a nice person. I opened it up for everybody. But I think when we do that, we don't always recognize that we haven't created a safe space for everyone to feel comfortable to use their voice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so stepping outside of that to be able to also get information to help to know where you can do better.
Yeah. Jill, I would 100% say that that's helpful, because, you know, I've had a manager that asked me that question often, not just me, but people on her team, as things happen, or, you know, sometimes it's something that I didn't even recognize, but she would ask, you know, how could I have supported you differently or better in this situation? And sometimes I'm like, oh, interesting, I hadn't thought about it, you know, like, but the fact that her mind is going and she's constantly thinking about, how do I make sure that my team feels like they belong and that they are included, and that you know, she values each of the cultures that we come from and what's happening in the world, right? That we're all impacted by. And it's one of the things that I've just learned, right, as a leader too, on like just asking that question of, how can I be more supportive? Or, you know, hey, we had this conversation, you said something during the meeting, you know, do you mind elaborating on that a little bit more? How can I provide support in this situation? I mean, it completely blew me away that she was even thinking about it in that way. So I know that that is helpful.
Yeah, it's always we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
So can we lean in to ask and learn from others?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that going to go, Stacey, even your comment, thank you, about, celebrating other holidays.
Yeah.
Once again, it's about bringing whole people.
Mm-hmm.
If you've been with us long enough, you know that our whole perspective is we are all amazing humans that have gifts to share.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the more we can embrace that and honor that with each other, like that's part of building culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you, Chelsea, too, for that comment. That's been a huge learning for me, that opening up a floor is not the same as having safe space.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I love it even with Stacey's comment on like putting things in perspective. Even as you think about allyship, right? Like that's one thing that allies have in common with one another is that they have a perspective, right? And so being able to present that perspective and say, hey, well, this happens, why not this? Or we do this, why not that? How is it different, right? Like, why would we not want to learn from this situation or know about a situation or enjoy, right, a situation, is like just that perspective too can help with that growth.
Yes. We are more alike than different.
That is very true.
Yvonne, you're just like me. I don't do math but right, when we look for the things that we're more like me, you're like me because of this. You're like me because of this. That helps create connection versus separation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and being inclusive and connecting.
Yeah. Find so many things in common with one another. You're just talking about it and learning from each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you think it's ridiculous, it's even things like, ooh, look, you're like me, we both like orange.
I know.
It doesn't have to be a big thing, but one small thing can help create the connection.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, one of the things that even as we think about, this conversation that we have is really around like that we do have a lot of things in common, and we do have things that even if they are different that we can learn from and grow from, and that we actually need in our cultures. And then Yvonne, you brought up early on where, introducing statistics and data to your organization, like having that knowledge and knowing that is there is like that eliminates the unconsciousness from it, right? Like it's one of the things that makes it very conscious, where it's like, oh man, this happens in our industry. Where are we in our organization and where do we want to be, right? In order for us to be inclusive. What do our floor team look like? And then what do our leadership team look like? Like that's something that has stood out to me that Larry Keener talk about all the time, right? On like, does leadership reflect what your floor team looks like? And so in order for it to like be conscious, right? Like having that data there, or just being able to acknowledge that this exists and we need to do something about it, or we want our culture to look different, is like the first step.
Yep. And we have a lot of food safety culture surveys that we put out on the floor, and with our management as well, and putting that information out there in different ways. Like some people like a hard copy where they actually can take a survey. Some people like to use a QR code and then go online to do some of those surveys, but getting back that information, really analyzing it and seeing where you need to work on certain areas.
Yes.
So important.
Yeah. Doing something with that data, right? Not just having it sit there. And, I think that goes into us talking about like being intentional, being intentional about collecting that data and being intentional about what you're going to do about that data is so important.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Our hour goes so quickly. Wow. Thank you, Yvonne, for being here and hopefully giving some new perspectives and ideas and opening some new doors for all of us. I definitely have some good takeaways too, and I appreciate that you've shared these with us and kind of challenge us to say, what are we noticing and where can we do better? Isn't that Maya Angelou who says, do better, like do better when you know?
Yeah.
I cannot remember her specific quote, but when we know more, we can do better.
Yes, there you go.
Know more, we do better.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for being here. And thank you to our audience for listening and being a part of it and really thinking about how you can become a more inclusive leader and how you can help shape your organization's culture in food safety culture to be exactly what we as consumers, right, really need our food and beverage organizations to be. So thank you for being a part of the conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jill and Tia, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And we will be back next Wednesday, same times, 12 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Central, here on your LinkedIn Live. And we do have all of our videos up on YouTube. So if you cannot sit through the whole live or you need to watch us a little later on, that's okay. Just join us on our YouTube channel.
Yes. All right. Well, we will catch you next week. Until then, have a wonderful week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.